Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Timing is Everything, Using Experimental Gardens and Citizen Science to Respond to Climate Change, with Dr. Elisa Hovey, and co-presenting with her are alumni Jenna Joyner and James Kitchens. My name is Heather Wingert, and I'm the Director of Parent and Community Relations. We're excited to have more than 120 people registered for the webinar today. Right now, we want to recognize our Champion, Leadership, Platinum, and Gold level sponsors for 2020. Sponsors support our events throughout the year with generous gifts to the college, and we are grateful for their support of today's event and initiatives on campus that forward our mission. During the presentation, if you wish to ask a question about today's presentation, please submit your question using the Q&A. You'll find the Q&A box as you hover over your screen with your mouse. I'll be moderating the Q&A throughout the presentation. We will finish the presentation on the hour and stay a few minutes after that to answer as many questions as we can. My colleagues in advancement will also be monitoring the Q&A. Now, I would like to introduce our co-host of today's webinar, Dr. Dave Elam. Dave is Dean of Land Resources with over 13 years at the college. He has been paramount in delivering public educational opportunities for the wider community through the Conservation Exchange at Warren Wilson. The Conservation Exchange is developing a model by creating new resources for landowners, and it's reaching out to engage local, national, and international stakeholders in sustainable, economically viable, innovative land stewardship. The Conservation Exchange relies on the applied learning philosophy central to a Warren Wilson education to spread hope and meaningful action against the backdrop of climate change. If you're interested in learning more about the research initiatives, community partnerships, resources for landowners, and public lectures and workshops for sustainable land management, you can use your phone right now to take a picture of the QR code on the bottom of your screen to follow the Conservation Exchange on Facebook. Or you can visit the Land Innovation page on our website and sign up for the Conservation Exchange newsletters. We'll be sure to include a link in the chat box today. And now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Dave Elam, who will introduce our Vice President for Academic Affairs. Dave?
Thanks, Heather. It's great to be with you all again. It's a pleasure to introduce our newly appointed Vice President of Academic Affairs, Jay Roberts. Dr. Roberts comes to Warren Wilson from Earlham College, where he was most recently the Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs. For the past year, he has served as a fellow with the American Council on Education. Dr. Roberts is a recognized teacher and scholar. His most recent book, Experiential Education in the College Context, What It Is, How It Works, and Why It Matters, was published by Routledge in 2016. He was named as a Teagle Teaching Fellow by the Great Lakes College Association in 2011. He is a noted expert on experiential learning, making him an ideal choice for Warren Wilson College. He has also served on several educational and environmental boards and gives lectures and workshops on numerous campuses nationally and internationally. Dr. Roberts earned his PhD from Miami University in Educational Leadership, his MA in Education from the University of Virginia, and his BA from Lawrence University in Anthropology with an interdisciplinary concentration in environmental studies. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jay Roberts, who will introduce our speaker. Jay, take it away.
Thanks, Dave. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be with you for this wonderful opportunity to hear more about the research that our faculty are doing and the great work that Dave is doing as well with the Conservation Exchange. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Elisa Hovey. Dr. Hovey has been a biology professor at Warren Wilson since August of 2012, and she came to North Carolina after earning a PhD in evolutionary biology from the University of California, Santa Barbara. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of California, Davis, and a master's degree in biology from Humboldt State University, where she studied pollination biology of a wildflower species occurring in the Klamath Mountains. At Warren Wilson, Dr. Hovey serves as the chair for the biology department and teaches a variety of courses, including genetics, evolutionary biology, and plant physiology. Her research focuses on identifying the ecological and genetic conditions that favor the evolution of different reproductive and life history strategies under conditions of environmental stress, characterizing genetic diversity in vulnerable plant and animal species in montane habitats, and using DNA barcoding to characterize ecological communities. As many of you probably know, here at Warren Wilson, we are somewhat of an informal bunch, and I'd like to add to that formal introduction with just a few personal reflections from my interactions thus far with Elisa this summer. I've had the pleasure of working closely with Dr. Hovey this summer on our faculty working group as we prepared to reopen campus and launch a fall semester like none other in the college's history. And here's what I would like to say about that. You would want Elisa on your crew, whether it's a global pandemic crisis or just a knotty subject that needs untangling. Elisa is who you want on the team. Her sharp analytical skills, her generous and team-oriented demeanor, and her knack for finding pragmatic solutions to complex problems has made her a tremendous asset to the faculty working group this summer and to Warren Wilson as a whole. Her talk today is titled "Timing is Everything: Using Experimental Gardens and Citizen Science to Respond to Climate Change." And I think she's right. Timing is everything. And I'm so grateful for the time I've spent with Dr. Hovey thus far at Warren Wilson this summer. I've certainly learned what a treasure and a resource she is for our students and for our college. So won't you please join me in welcoming Dr. Elisa Hovey for our webinar today. Elisa?
All right. Well, thanks, Jay, so much for that introduction. And I just have to say that I don't think I would be in this place able to talk about phenology today with the larger community if it wasn't for two amazing students who are going to be presenting with me today. I just want to take a minute to introduce Jenna Joyner, who earned a BS in biology in 2019. Jenna's currently a lab tech at a local scientific research facility called Abundant Labs, where they're exploring ways to synthesize and produce CBD-related products in collaboration with the college. And James Kitchens, who is joining us from California, he earned his bachelor's degrees in biology and chemistry here, and went out to California to pursue an internship at Caltech. He's currently working as a biomedical analyst for the company Venebio. And so these two students both worked for me for years in the lab. We've shared a lot of laughs, a lot of time in the field, and a lot of really engaging work together, and I'm looking forward to sharing this presentation with them. So when I first came to Warren Wilson, one of the things that really struck me was the fact that the college has an over 600-acre outdoor laboratory that can just serve as this excellent place to address cutting-edge ecological questions that impact people worldwide. And one of the questions that we're looking at involves phenology, or the study of the timing of seasonal events in nature. Today, let me just go to my next slide. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit with you about what the science of the seasons, or what phenology is. I'll talk about how the research community connects phenology to ongoing research addressing climate change. James will introduce the USA National Phenology Network and how citizen scientists all over the nation are contributing to a lot of this effort. And Jenna will share with you some of the work that's ongoing at Warren Wilson College. And we'll also have time to answer any questions that arise from you, our audience. So before I jump in too far, though, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge my research partner in this work, Amy Boyd, a fellow biology professor at Warren Wilson College, and a variety of students who have contributed over the years to the establishment of this research program, as well as the staff and other institutions that supported some of this work. So phenology is defined as the study of the timing of seasonal events in nature. And I think we all have an intuitive sense of phenology as we consider the emergence of wildflowers in the spring, the timing of black bears foraging in our trash cans or around our homes and gardens in the summertime when they emerge, and the timing of the migration of various types of insects and birds. Phenology is a study that has roots for centuries, because the timing of these events in nature have wide-ranging implications for human societies. So Ecotourism, especially in Western North Carolina around fall seasonal leaf color changes, is a big part of our economy in the area. And for many farmers, the timing of plant emergence, the timing of pest infestations, and the timing of a variety of other factors influences crop yields. Phenology also has implications for human health as we think about the timing of seasonal events like the flu, as well as allergies. Biologists discuss phenology and talk about it using this phrase called phenophase, which you'll hear a fair amount during the talk today. Phenophases just reference the specific life stages of different plants or animals. And in the case of this plant, the common lilac, the individual is going to transition from having these breaking buds to producing young leaves, and then the phenophase open flowers, and then kind of a full floral display. One of my favorite ways to kind of think about phenology, this is a video I show in my classes quite a bit, is to think about just this long history of phenological research in our nation, and also the connections that it has with ongoing efforts and historic efforts to conserve wild places in our area. So I just want to play this short 2.5 minute or so video for you guys to watch.
Let me tell you how we got onto this whole idea of keeping records. Phenology is a way of seeing the earth. The fact that you keep records all of a sudden changes the way you see the natural systems around you. My father was Alder Leopold, and my father wrote, "Keeping records enhances the pleasure of the search and the chance of finding order and meaning in these events." We spent all our weekends at the shack out here on the Wisconsin River. I can remember to this day standing in front of the shack when the first cranes went over. They were almost extinct in this area. Dad was so excited. He said, "A crane sounds like a frog with a sore throat." Here are these birds going over with this croaking sound. But that was a phenological item. And from then on, of course, cranes increased and we see them regularly. We record the first arrival of birds, the first blooming of plants. We have compared our phenological data with my father's data, and a third of the items are coming 2 to 3 weeks earlier than when Dad was here. We've been moving gradually toward climate change. All of a sudden, we're seeing major changes. I think keeping long-term records is graphic and shows you the changes. All you need is some way of writing it down, a pencil and a paper. Otherwise, if you didn't have it written down, you wouldn't be able to see it. I think when the cranes arrive in the spring and you hear all this calling from every direction and you watch it, it's drama. It's beautiful. I'm 92 years old. I get just as excited as anybody.
I think that just really sort of shows how captivating phenology can be for everyone, not just for Warren Wilson's college students. More recently, in a scholarly journal, the biologists Jessica Forrest and Abe Miller-Rushing made the point that phenology really affects all aspects of ecology and evolution here on Earth, and studying phenology provides a lens through which we can explore a variety of different topics, ranging from simple population ecology to global nutrient shifts and fluxes. When we think about the ecological significance of phenology, we often think about just the dynamic nature of organisms and individuals over the course of a growing season. And ecologists put phenological stages into 2 different kind of bins. One is vegetative phenology. So that's shown right here on the left with this buckeye. And Vegetative phenology relates to when leaves emerge, grow, and provide energy to the plant that supports its reproduction and growth. More broadly, these leaves also act as food sources and habitat for animals and can also influence global biogeochemical cycles, such as the carbon cycle right here, where those little kind of zigzags that you're seeing on the graph here represent those seasonal, within season, shifts in when carbon is being sucked out of the atmosphere by trees. Reproductive phenology, on the other hand, refers to the timing of the production of flowers and fruits. So plant reproduction in most cases is fully dependent on flowers that, if they are pollinated, develop into fruits. Those fruits can act as key resources for wildlife that consume them. The flowers act as key resources for a variety of pollinators that use their pollen and nectar to support their own life histories. And one thing I'm constantly reinforcing in my classes is that phenophases, while they're influenced by environmental factors like temperature, they're also to some extent hardwired by genes. And so some of the phenophases that have been studied in depth include the timing of first flowering, the timing of animal emergence, when individuals produce babies, or when they migrate. And some aspect of those are genetically determined, but they're also determined by both genes and the environment in conjunction. Phenology, we can see right here on this figure, is something that can kind of vary from year to year. But one thing that has emerged consistently is the environmental influence of temperature and precipitation has impacts on phenology. In general, in thousands of diverse organisms ranging from birds to mammals to insects to plants, we're seeing this kind of earlier spring phenology, kind of what was mentioned in that video with Nina Leopold. Likewise, we're also starting to see that winters are getting shorter and spring and summer seasons are getting a lot longer. In recent years, well, this is actually now a study that's about 10 years old, the biologist Camille Parmesan conducted a meta-analysis where she compared the findings of multiple studies that had a similar experimental setup and tested similar hypotheses to ask the question, do phenological responses to climate change differ or vary among taxa? And the graph that I'm showing you right now shows the findings from across 203 different species, and they're grouped by sort of class of living thing, amphibians, birds, butterflies, plants, etc. And we can see that in general, a lot of things are emerging earlier. So they are coming out earlier in the growing season. Some things are coming out later, but what I want you to pay attention to is just the fact that the size of those bars is really variable. There's variation among species. And this is a really important study. It's one that I often assign to students in my classes because the implications of variation in phenological responses to climate shifts are phenological mismatches. So many animals and plants and other organisms have evolved over time to match the timing of their activity with the timing of the availability of a key resource, for example, food. But a mismatch can occur if the timing of when a resource is available does not match the timing of the demand for that resource. So if we were to look at this image that I'm showing you right here, image A on the left represents a phenological match where the bird, the great tit, is laying its eggs at a time when food is available for the chicks that will hatch, right? On the other hand, if there's a phenological mismatch, let's say the insect shifts its timing, but the bird does not, then the bird could potentially starve. And this has already been recorded in one species in Europe called the pied flycatcher. It's reliant for food on something called the winter moth. And the winter moth, in turn, is reliant on the English oak. Over time, the English oak has started leafing out earlier, and the winter moth has started emerging earlier. So those two are in sync. However, the pied flycatcher is migrating at the same time each year, and that means that when it gets to its migratory spot, it doesn't have enough food. And this has led to severe population declines in some parts, but not all parts of its range. And a seminal report came out in 2007 where the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change started encouraging the scientific community to think more carefully about phenology. And quoting from their report, phenology is perhaps the simplest process in which one could track changes in the ecology of a species in response to climate change. One way that we do this is through something called a coordinated research network. And I'm going to mute my screen now, but I'm not going to answer my phone and let James continue this part of the talk.
Thank you, Elisa. There are a lot of great aspects to studying phenology, and one of my favorites is just how accessible participation in this type of research is. There are a number of initiatives across the country and the world that have put research directly in the hands of volunteers and citizen scientists. And these coordinated phenology research networks have developed standard protocols for making phenological observations to ensure that everyone participating in these studies has a consistent understanding of what each phenophase looks like and how to properly make observations. And by doing this, they've managed to greatly expand their data acquisition capacity and distribution across the nation, and very importantly, are able to engage local community members, teachers, students, and everyone in between in this important research. And on the next slide, one of these research networks that we have worked most closely with is the National Phenology Network, which is based out of the University of Arizona. They've created a program called Nature's Notebook, which is a nationwide monitoring program that consists of a standard protocol or standard protocols for over 1,000 species of plants and animals combined. And this is one of the most widely used programs for studying phenology across the United States and has garnered a lot of support from various universities and institutions in the United States. And for users of Nature's Notebook, it's as easy as downloading an iPhone application or Android application, which you'll see later in this presentation as a screenshot. And all of the data that you collect is automatically synced with the National Phenology Network's databases. So it's really easy to get started and use. On the next slide, we can see that there are thousands of Nature's Notebook users distributed across the country, with over 900 users within North Carolina alone. And these numbers are still growing day after day, year after year. And on the next slide, we actually have a chart of the cumulative number of Nature's Notebook users over time since 2012, with amazing growth throughout the last 8 years of the program. And by the end of 2020, maybe we'll surpass over 40,000 users in the program, which would be a really awesome goal to see the program hit. On the next slide, we have a chart of the number of observations per year that users are making and adding to the National Phenology Network's database, with over 400,000 observations, well over 400,000 observations being added in 2017, 2018, and 2019, which is just so much data to be included in this research. It wouldn't be possible for a single researcher to be doing this amount of work. And so having this coordinated group of citizen scientists and volunteers is really important for this style research. And I like this graph because you can actually see in 2020 the potential impacts of COVID on the number of observations that we're seeing. So there's definitely a significant decline in 2020, but potentially this will, and hopefully this will rebound as conditions become safer for everyone to go out and make their observations again. This huge number of observations and distribution of observations allow scientists to look into nationwide phenological trends, such as the onset of spring. On this slide, we can see that by using a phenophase, which is leaf index, as a proxy for studying the onset of spring, we can see how the timing of spring varies across the country, coming generally earlier for states in the South, as well as states that are at lower elevations, as we would expect. And on the next slide, scientists have looked at how this past spring in 2020 compares to the average timing of springs between 1980 and 2010. And so in this chart, or in this figure, Areas in red are had an earlier onset of spring than the average, and areas that are colored blue have had a later onset of spring. And this research, this visualization wouldn't be possible unless you had this nice distribution and this large amount of data coming in from so many volunteers across the country. And so this is one of the most important aspects of this research, that anyone can kind of participate in it. And so now Jenna is going to take over and talk about how we've incorporated phenological research into our curriculum at Warren Wilson College.
Thanks, James. So James was kind of talking about what is going on a national level when you accumulate all this data from different places around the country. But we have some goals at Warren Wilson College for our own phenology program that I want to talk with you about. So the first goal is to establish a long-term monitoring program which encompasses multiple habitats on campus. The second is to engage students and the local community in citizen science through use of the NPN, and to address scientific questions and resource management challenges that come along the way. So next slide, please. Thank you. So there's 3 different phenological sites that are located on campus. One is located in a forest understory, that's our shade garden. One is located at a riparian zone, which is along our river trail. And then the last one is in an exposed meadow, which is our sun garden. These were established back in 2017 with the help of students and faculty. And they are intended to be long-term monitoring locations so that we can collect data over time. Next slide. Thank you. So the sun garden is has 10 different plant species, including partridge pea, primrose. You can see in that first picture, there's some beautiful Joe Pye weed growing, as well as milkweed. And that location, the plants are organized in like a grid formation. The shade garden has plants such as black cohosh, trout lily, and bloodroot. The locations are a little bit more free-form because some of the plants were planted and others were are being monitored that were already there. And then lastly, the Phenology Trail has 12 different native species which weren't planted, they were on the trail already. Yeah, next slide. Thank you. So the second goal is to engage students and local community in these phenology efforts. And what you'll see in this first image is a class out on the river trail. So one of the ways that we are utilizing these sites is by engaging students through classes. So in an ecology class, for example, these sites can be used to, or phenology in general can be used to teach about environmental changes in response to climate change, basically everything that Elisa was saying before about the impacts of like phenotypic mismatches, for example. Using these sites can also help students in plant identification, as well as giving them an opportunity to go outside and do something more hands-on by monitoring. You'll see, you can also, over time, it can be useful for students to see how plants are actually changing. So I know one of our professors, Olia, in her ecology class, she would have students go out and monitor the trail at the beginning of the semester and then again at the end of the semester so that they could see how the trees were changing over time. These sites can also be a great backdrop for classes during times of COVID. I know Elisa was talking about using the sun garden as a backdrop for her class coming up this next semester. Through internships, students have also been able to do all of this kind of classwork, but basically on steroids, in that they're actually helping establish these sites and work in data collection and other things like GIS skills and scientific communication with other colleges. Through the Sirius internship, which James and I were both a part of, we were in collaboration with Appalachian State University as well as UNCA. And you can see there, James is giving a presentation at ASB, which is the Association of Southeastern Biologists Conference, I believe in 2017, maybe 2018. And then over time, one of the benefits of doing this monitoring is students may be able to use data collected from these sites on campus for bigger independent studies or their INSERS projects. So that's something that we're excited for in the future. Next slide, please. So what does this phenology monitoring actually look like from the perspective of a student or a citizen scientist who wants to engage in the research? I think one of our most accessible phenology sites is the River Trail, which is located on the west side of the river, right past the bridge. You can see this gorgeous map made by James. And the way that we monitor trees along the river trail is through the app that James was talking about, Nature's Notebook. So this is an app that it connects to the NPN. The data from it is sent directly to their databases. And so it's a great way to be contributing to their data databases. So I have it here on my phone. It's really easy to use. Basically, when you go to one of these sites, like the River Trail, for example, the trees will all be tagged. You can correlate the tags to the ID on the app. So on the next slide, please. So these are all of the tree species that are located on the River Trail that you would be monitoring if you were out and about doing some phenology work. And presumably, so we're all inside right now, but I want to take a moment and if you would, close your eyes and imagine that you are outside on the river trail looking at one of these trees. Pick whichever you like. So you're outside, it's a beautiful day, birds are chirping, maybe there's a rainbow in the distance, and you look up into this tree in front of you and ask yourself what you notice about it. So does this tree have leaves? Are they leaf buds? Or are they fully grown leaves? Are the leaves colored? If you look around on the ground, do you see recent leaf drops? Next, do you notice any flowers on this tree? Are they flower buds or are they in full bloom? What percentage of them do you think are in full bloom, if any of them are? Do you notice any fruit on this tree? Are they ripe fruit or are they just starting to emerge? If you look around on the ground, do you see any signs of fruit drops? So all of those questions that I asked are examples that you would see on Nature's Notebook that it would ask you. And so it's really easy. You just put in the answers and then you move on to the next tree. Anyone can do it. It's fun to do in classes and groups, but you know, citizen scientists can go out with their phone and contribute to this data as well. So I think at this point, Heather, do we have a poll? Yes, thank you. Okay, so you should see a poll in front of you asking about if you have used one of these citizen science projects before, if you participated in them. So if you could take a moment to answer that.
People are still voting.
Okay.
We'll give it just a couple more seconds here.
Okay, thank you. One thing that I'd like to add as well, having done internships with Elisa and having phenology monitoring as a part of my work on genetics crew for the past 2 years, I have gone out and monitored this trail well over 100 times, many, many times. And I have to say that one benefit that I find to phenology monitoring is it really helps you kind of stop and take a minute to observe nature around you. And in a way that I don't think most of the times when we're taking hikes, we really do. And I think having walked that trail so many times, I'm more familiar with that area of land than I am any other place in the world. And it's really awesome to have that connection to a location like that. Okay, do we have our results? No, okay, so most people, we don't have experience with it yet, but you seem interested, so that's exciting. iNaturalist is a really popular app as well for phenology and stuff like that, and also identification. So if we go to the next slide, thank you. So big picture, what we can do with this data that we're collecting is address bigger questions. So some of those questions might be, do communities or habitats differ in their phenological response to climate change? What are the earliest indicators of spring? Next. Which taxa or functional groups are most sensitive to climate change? And are relationships between plant and animal mutualists being disrupted by climate change? So these are all really interesting questions. And I think especially having students engage in this kind of data collection and also later on addressing these questions and working with big data is a really great educational opportunity. And I look forward to seeing where all this work put into our phenology sites goes in the future in answering questions like this. So with that said, I will bounce this back to Elisa.
All right, thank you, Jenna. It's been a while since we've given a talk together, so it's great to be able to do it even in this virtual forum. So just to kind of wrap up a little, I hope that I've been able to share with you today, or that we have been able to share with you today, that research into phenology really has the potential to help us as a society address and understand some of the effects of climate change on Earth's natural systems, but also to engage people in the subtle and fine art of observing things in nature that often we walk by during the busy, hectic paces of our lives. And we've put a lot of energy and thought in the last few years into developing ways to integrate phenology into the student experience here at Warren Wilson College. But I think an area where we're really thinking about growing in the future is trying to involve more members of the overall broader community, as well as trying to integrate animals into our studies of phenology. I'm a botanist. Botanists or plants are really my comfort zone, but there's a lot of information that we can learn by looking at our animal friends. And if you're interested in learning more about phenology, I've put my email here as well as Dave Ellum's. Dave is also really interested in phenology too, and you can feel free to contact any of us. And I guess with that, what I'm going to do is just stop sharing my screen right now and take any questions or Jenna, James, and I will take any questions that might come up.
That's great. This is wonderful. Thank you, James, Jenna, and Dr. Hovey. This was an amazing presentation. We do have some questions that are coming in, and one in particular related to the slide that you had showed, James, the spring slide. And the question is, why did spring not show as early in South Florida as the rest of the South? And do you have an idea of how many number of citizen scientists are in that area?
Yeah, I was actually looking into that a little bit. And so it is, I don't know exactly how the model is generating the colors across the entire United States, but it is consistently showing South Florida as this kind of anomaly compared to the rest of the South, where much of the rest of the South is experiencing the earliest spring onset that they've seen in history or close to it, whereas South Florida isn't following that trend. So I would have to look into exactly how the climate in that region is changing or what factors are going into their model. But it was definitely an interesting question, yeah.
Great. And we've got another one here referring to, do you plan to include non-native species in your research?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. So we've started out with native plant species, but there's a lot of evidence that shows that one mechanism that provides an advantage for invasive species as they're colonizing areas is sort of a advanced earlier phenology. One that comes to mind is autumn olive, which is a real nasty shrub pest in this area. And it has a relatively early phenology, which allows it to grow really quickly and get a little bit of a competitive edge on some native species. So around in the area that is surrounding the Sun Garden, on the margins of that meadow, there's a fair amount of Oriental bittersweet and multiflora rose, which would be pretty straightforward to tag. So that's one area where we're kind of thinking about moving forward.
Okay. This one's also for you, Elisa. One of the slides showed that phenology influences ecology and evolution. Could you discuss why it is not the other way around, that the ecology and evolution of organism affects their phenology? Or do you consider it all the same?
Haha, that's a great question from my friend Jill. Hi, Jill. I think you can sort of think about it in both ways. So in reality, what has happened is that a lot of individual organisms have evolved in response to ecological cues, adaptations, or phenological schedules that maximize their ability to produce lots of offspring. And over time, genotypes that had the highest fitness are the ones that accumulated in populations, right? And so as we think about that in the context of evolution and ecology, it's really that phenology is the outcome of almost a very difficult amount of ecological and evolutionary processes to count. And the interactions between species are also the outcome of that. So to kind of answer Jill's question, let me just look at it real quick. Could I discuss why it is not the other way around, that ecology and evolution of the organisms affect their phenology? I guess I do consider it all the same. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, but really in reality, those processes are highly interconnected.
Great, thank you. This next one is for Jenna. There's a question about how long the river trail is on campus.
Yeah, so the river trail is, the full trail is pretty long, but the section that we have trees tagged for monitoring, oh gosh, it's about a 30-minute walk. I'm not as good with distance, but I know walking the trail, that section normally takes about 30 minutes. If I'm monitoring the trail, it'll be about 45 minutes. So I used to do it during like lunch breaks. I would go out and I would be back in about an hour and a half.
Great. We have a question here related to the video and everything you've talked about today about if spring is happening, for example, 2 to 3 weeks earlier, what does this say about climate change? Is this an indication of something that we should be concerned about?
I'm sorry, Heather, can you repeat that? I was just sort of, I was watching, I kind of lost, I'm a terrible multitasker, but I was watching the chat a little bit.
That's quite all right. This was a question about if spring is happening and it's happening 2 to 3 weeks earlier, does this say something about climate change? And is it any indication of something that we should all be concerned about?
The short answer to that question is that the timing of spring emergence has really been relatively consistent for a very long time, but we see this early onset happening in the last few decades, really since like 1985. And one thing is that we're seeing spring come earlier, but it's not like, say in February, late February, conditions become really nice and verdant and beautiful. What we see instead is that there's this earlier warmer temperature that stimulates the activity of certain kinds of organisms, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other sort of more punctuated events that happen when there are frosts. And so what happens if an organism emerges too early before the real, quote, real growing season is fully or starts, is they could emerge too early and then be very vulnerable, especially with young growing parts, to things like frost. And so it really is something to be concerned about.
So this question might go back to James. It's related to that map again. Why do scientists think that spring is being delayed in more northern areas?
Yeah, I actually once again, haven't looked into that super deeply. So I don't know if Elisa could chime in as well. I know that the models are being used are, I believe, 3 different species that are widely distributed across the United States. But there may be different conditions that they're experiencing in these different areas. Once again, it does look like it's pretty consistent that regions in the north are having this delayed spring onset across many years that we've been seeing.
I guess just to chime into what James is saying is that there are these very strong elevational and latitudinal factors that interact with or intersect with climatic conditions. And to be honest, I haven't researched it that closely either. That was something that jumped out at me as we were looking at the map together last night. But I would imagine that there are certain species that are sensitive to, I talked about genes being a determinant of phenology, I talked about environment, but in a lot of species, the day length also plays a role. And so when we add genes, climate, day length, elevation, and latitude, there are a number of intersecting factors that could contribute to that observation.
Great. Okay, this next question is for any of you who wants to take it. It's a great question about how are you recruiting citizen scientists to help with observations? And are you able to use data collected in iNaturalist?
James or Jenna, do you want to take that one? I can take it too.
I can take start. Oh, go ahead.
Go for it, James. You do it.
Okay. So there are a number of sites around the United States that are already within the National Phenology Network system. So the Phenology Trail at Warren Wilson College is just one of many sites that you can actually go and participate. When we're including this in the curriculum for Warren Wilson, it's actually part of the ecology class curriculum. And we walked the students through kind of a short training session on these are where the trees are on the trail, as well as showing them pictures of what each phenophase looks like and how they can identify them by themselves, so that everyone kind of has this baseline. I know when I came into this project, I had not seen many of these trees, or I didn't know how to properly identify many of these trees before. So it was very much a learning experience in the beginning. Right now, with the current pandemic, we're still looking into ways of like how we can set ourselves up so that we can bring people potentially to certain sites or properly train people so that they can participate in citizen science once everything kind of calms down some. But I would definitely recommend looking into kind of your local area, wherever you may be, and seeing if there's already a site set up by someone that maybe has a few trees that you can stop by and make it a daily walk or a weekly walk kind of thing.
I guess I would add to that the Arboretum here in Asheville is a National Phenology Network recording site, and there are several plots in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park that have where phenology is being monitored. I would also add, we've primarily been recruiting citizen scientists using students right now, but I think given Warren Wilson's emphasis on community engagement, there's a lot of opportunity for students in courses to work with local schools. When I was living back in Santa Barbara, I worked on phenology at a local Boys and Girls Club. And so the very nice thing about Nature's Notebook is that it's data that people can be collecting with relatively little training. And I was going to say one more thing about that. Oh, and I was also going to say that a lot of communities also have informal science social gathering places. Like in Asheville, two of the ones we have are the Asheville Science Pub and the Asheville Science Tavern, which I'm a part of, as is Jill, who asked me that cool question about ecology and evolution, where we get together every month and hear science talks at a local brewery, but then there's also opportunities to potentially, when it's safe for us to hike and train together, collect data in a sort of a social way. So it's a great question.
One thing that I'd like to add real quick, kind of addressing that second question about being able to use data collected from iNaturalist. I haven't worked with data collected through that service, but the data collected through Nature's Notebook and the NPN is open source. There's a great tool on their website where you can access that data. You can set parameters about what you're looking for and retrieve those big data sets for you to do your own research. It's relatively user-friendly. The data itself can be a little bit overwhelming. I've worked with it before, but it is a great resource for students or citizens that are interested. So, yeah.
That's great. Okay, so we've got a question here about, are there considerations for choosing species to make sure their phenology is temperature driven? Certain changes in plants at least are driven by light cycles. Perhaps this could affect changes in South Florida, specifically as their temperature changes are not quite as significant throughout the year.
Our primary considerations when choosing species were, ones, we wanted to choose species that had reproductive phenology visible at different times of the year. So species that may flower early in the year, middle of the year, and as well as late. And then we also chose species that we thought, after the students and Amy Boyd and I discussed this all together at length, that had phenological stages that were discrete and sort of straightforward for people to see and to record. And so we kind of thought a lot more about user friendliness, but the outcome of this research is we can ask this question, which species are actually more temperature sensitive? Because right now we know, like if someone does a study on a particular species, they can say, yes, the species is not particularly sensitive to changes in temperature. Its phenological schedule is pretty constant. And that might be true for a different species, but we don't really know, we don't really have a sense very broadly about how the relative effects of genes and climate and photoperiodism or day length intersect in multiple taxa. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, so we have a question coming from a social anthropologist around, particularly related, Dr. Hovey, to your courses. Do you tie the concepts of phenology, even metaphorically, into related concepts of human ecology and evolution? And this person is asking because of a special interest in cultural evolution and also how it can impact climate change. So just wanting to know kind of your thoughts on that piece about approaching human ecology and cultural evolution in that way.
That's a great question too. I think one thing that really sort of ties students and I think gets them interested in phenology is the fact that it does have so many connections with humans and culture. So I talk about one of the oldest phenological data sets that we're aware of now is data or data from records that were taken at Japanese sakura or cherry blossom festivals. So the timing of the cherry blossom festivals 800 years ago is later than it is now. And we know that because of these historical records. Also, the philosopher Henry David Thoreau took really detailed phenological records. So one of the things that I do in plant ecology is I assign the paper that uses Thoreau's data, but then we talk a little bit about sort of how legacy data or historical data can contribute to ongoing studies of climate change. And that's actually a pretty hot topic in the field right now. A lot of people are interested in using the data. This isn't so much a cultural or a human ecology source, but data from museum specimens and herbarium specimens that were collected a long time ago, and digitizing those data and using machine learning to try to look for trends and patterns related to phenology. It's pretty cool.
So there's a question here about, is there a silver lining to the ever lengthening warm season? For example, increasing carbon sequestration?
I think one silver lining is that maybe from a crop production standpoint is that as one large scale response of plants to climate change is sort of a shifting range expansion. So species that may historically have grown further south, growing better a little further north. And so maybe there's the potential for some innovative crop development. My dad's an avocado farmer. I don't know if he made it onto this Zoom webinar or not, but he's been experimenting with growing like goji berries and a variety of different crops. He could probably answer the question better if he were here. So that's one silver lining. I think a lot of folks are looking into the idea of carbon sequestration, but the reality is that as photosynthetic rates increase and carbon is being absorbed from the environment, as temperature increases, there are also increasing rates of cellular respiration and biological activity that also emit more carbon into the environment. And then there's also all these things that we're doing as a human society to inject carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So that's a very sort of tricky mathematical question that we could all probably nerd out on for a while, but I don't have a really straightforward answer to it.
That's great. And we're coming up on the hour, but I want to thank you all so much, Dr. Hovey, James, and Jenna. It's so great to learn about your research, what you're doing on campus, and what you're doing now in your careers. This is really great. We want to end our presentation. We have an important announcement to make about Warren Wilson College, and we will have Dave Elam give that announcement. I did want to let everybody know we are recording this, and we will send you out a link so that you can share it broadly and widely with others. So thank you so much for joining us. And now I will kick it off to Dave, and Erica will bring up that last slide to share with us.
Thanks, Heather. That was great. That was fantastic. One of the things that's really awesome about working at Warren Wilson College is learning from our students. And I can tell you right now that both Jenna and James schooled me while they were here at the college, and I'm really happy to see they're still doing it now in their careers. So thanks to all three of you for that great presentation. I also want to thank you all for supporting and engaging with the Conservation Exchange at Warren Wilson College. It's really great to build this conservation community around you. I also want to announce some great news that we just got. Warren Wilson College has just been recognized by the Association for the Advancement for Sustainability in Higher Education for completing the Sustainability Tracking, Assessment, and Rating System reporting process and earning a STARS Gold rating. That is really awesome for us to be on that track and to get a gold rating from STARS. We participate in the STARS reporting process because it provides accountability to values that are central to the college and are embedded in our mission and strategic imperatives. Those imperatives state that we prepare graduates to engage in groundbreaking scholarship, pursue meaningful careers with professionalism, and lead purposeful lives dedicated to fostering a just, equitable, and sustainable world. STARS allows us to assess the breadth of sustainability from diversity, equity, and inclusion to environmental stewardship and social justice. We're committed to continuing to be a leader in this area, and we're really excited and glad that you're joining us for this mission. So thanks to everyone for joining us, and I'm going to bounce it back to Heather to close us out.
Thanks, Dave. It's wonderful to have all of you here today. And if you're interested in getting in touch with Dave Elam, Dean of Land Resources, his email is delum, E-L-L-U-M, @warren-wilson.edu. And we look forward to keeping in touch. We are planning our next series of webinars to bring to you. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a good afternoon.